Hi, welcome. This is just a short video to give you a little bit of revision tips about production possibility frontiers. Now, from your lessons you'll know that these represent the efficiency of which an economy is using perhaps two variables. So we could be taking any sort of variables and comparing them to one another. So you could be looking at electronics company who produces televisions on one axis, perhaps this axis, and then DVD players on the other. So what we'd look at is then the amount of resources which are allocated between the two products which have similar resource needs in order to compare the impacts of the changes of resources. So for instance, if we had on this axis here the impact of computers, the production of computers, or let's not say computers, let's say TVs, a better idea. And on the bottom axis we're looking at DVD players. They're just slowly going a little bit out of fashion to manufacture these days, but we can use them all the same. So as we know, this represents the firm working efficiently. So anywhere on this line, we can represent what the firm is actually doing. So if the firm is producing at this point here, this would represent a roughly even split between the resources working at full efficiency. Anything on the line here, as you can see, is working at efficiency. Anything working elsewhere, which I'll look at in a minute, can represent inefficiency or the impossible situation. Now in this situation, if we were to allocate resources at this level of output, we could see that this would be the number of TVs we'd produce using this many resources, split that way. Ooh, not very straight line, that one. And this would be the number of DVDs produced at this level. So what we could look at here is we have to make decisions with an economy of whether or not which of the two products is potentially more viable, has more of demand, or is for the firm itself is more profitable. So what we might look at is changing the resources which are pointed towards one of the two products. Now, for instance, if we were to decide that our DVDs are selling at a much higher rate, or perhaps much more profitable, what we might see is we might see a shift from our original position here down the curve towards here. Now this represents greater resources being sent to DVD players, therefore producing more DVD players at the expense of the TV players here at point A. So point B represents the new level of DVD players being produced, A represents a new level of TV sets being produced. Now this goes to show that the reallocation of resources is showing less resources going to the TV, more resources going to the DVD player. Now obviously as a firm you might have to decide that is this worthwhile? Should we be sending more resources to DVD players? Are they quite relatively cheap to produce and therefore cheap to sell and therefore not as profitable? So perhaps we could also say that just by producing more DVDs, even if producing less TVs, we might still be making a fair amount of profit. So it adds those sort of like little questions to whether or not you want to shift your resources. Now, on the other side, we might have a situation by which if we're looking and we're producing anywhere within the curve, we can still produce to these two levels of DVDs and TVs here and here, but we are now inefficient. We are not using our maximum resources. That potentially means that we're not using all our staff as well as we could be. We're not using our equipment or our machinery, so there's stuff lying idle. Maybe we're not using our financial budget correctly, and there's money left over and not being spent properly. So anything within the curve represents a massive inefficiency, which is a situation that all firms really need to avoid at all costs. Now, if you ever to get a question, multiple choice question, for instance, asking what point X here represents, this represents the impossible situation. There is no way we can be working at point X because this would require more resources than we actually have. So it would require an increase in the number of available resources. Now, if we're on scarce resources or even we're at our limit, which we'll be working on this line, it's impossible to produce DVDs and TVs at this point with these number of resources because we don't have these. So what we have to ask ourselves is if we want to produce to that level, what does the economy or what does the business have to do? The simple question is find more resources, because the aim here is to expand the PPF curve outwards so we end up with something looking more akin to this. Now, how do we get these resources? Perhaps it's investing money in new equipment, new machinery, new staff, which would therefore lift the total amount of resources that we have available. Perhaps it's finding a new location or new source or new supplier so we can then boost that to a higher degree. But once again, that's going to cost and it's going to require a huge amount of investment, so therefore might not necessarily be applicable to all firms. Some firms might not want to expand resources because we find the situation if they expand too fast, they start to actually face inequalities and eventually diseconomies of scale. Okay, so that was just a short reminder of the production possibility frontier, how they work, points on the curve, and how we might look to extend the curve. Thanks very much. See you again in a different video later. Bye.